James never meant to find it, not the way he did, not on that quiet Tuesday night when the air in his cramped apartment felt too thick, too charged with something unspoken. The kind of stillness that isn't peace but a warning waiting to crack, open like a fissure beneath your feet. He was scrolling through an obscure online forum when a link blinked at him. No title, no preview, just a flicker of static, a file so heavily encrypted it seemed almost protective, like a secret buried deep beneath layers of silence. Something about it felt wrong, but the pull was irresistible. His finger hovered over the mouse, heart pounding in a rhythm that wasn't entirely his own, as if the world had momentarily narrowed to this single act. Clicking. And when he did, the room darkened around him, shadows twisting into shapes that weren't there before. What happened next wasn't just a discovery. It was an unraveling of everything James thought he knew about reality. The file wasn't a file at all. It was a recording, distorted but unmistakably alien, an archive of something no one dared speak about out loud. Aliens watching a human horror movie. At first it felt absurd. What possible horror could humans conjure that would so unnerve creatures from beyond the stars? But as the images flickered, the film revealed a nightmare so deeply rooted in human fear and violence that it transcended language, culture, and even time. And the strangest part, the aliens didn't just watch, they recoiled, their silent observation turning into panic so profound it forced them to wipe their own memories, as if the terror had infected their very minds. James's breath hitched as a voice, soft, trembling, almost a whisper, broke through the static, a name spoken that no one else could have known. The room around him shivered with a strange energy, like a veil lifting just enough to reveal the raw edges of the world. Then just as suddenly the voice stopped. A chill settled in his bones. And somewhere, far beyond the screen and his apartment walls, a person vanished, leaving behind nothing but the echo of that whispered name. Was it a warning? A plea? Or something far darker? There was a terrible beauty in the silence that followed, the kind that makes your skin crawl even when you try to convince yourself it's all just a trick of your mind. James sat frozen, caught between the horror on the screen and the terror in his own reality. Because if this was true, if what he saw was only a fraction of the hidden truths humanity had locked away, then everything he believed about the universe, about himself, was about to be rewritten. And the question hung heavier than ever. What happens when the watchers become haunted by what they see? Then, as the last flicker of the recording died, a chilling message appeared on his screen, one that wasn't there before. A single word, one that changed everything. The word on James's screen was simple. Remember. But it wasn't just a command. It felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, a summons from some corner of his mind he'd long forgotten, to visit. His fingers trembled, hovering over the keyboard as if typing might unravel the spell, or trap him deeper inside it. Outside, the night pressed close. The usual city hum dampened, like the world itself was holding its breath. He shut the laptop abruptly, the screen fading to black, but the room was still flooded with static, an afterimage of the alien watchers and their horror movie etched deep into his skull. And then the silence cracked, a faint rhythmic clicking, echoed somewhere behind the walls almost like a Morse code or a heartbeat. James swore he heard whispers, but when he pressed his ear to the door, nothing was there. The air shifted as if charged by invisible electricity, tightening the cage around his thoughts. Was it the recording, or was his mind beginning to fracture under its weight? He couldn't say anymore. The line between what he'd seen and what his brain was now inventing blurred with every shallow breath. Sleep was a cruel stranger that night, and when dawn arrived, James found the edges of his memory fraying. Faces, conversations, moments from the day before flickered in and out, like film reels caught in a loop. Had he really told his sister about the file? Or was that just another phantom, a ghost of a conversation that dissolved whenever he tried to recall it? The file, the so-called forbidden recording, felt less like an external truth and more like a dark seed planted deep inside his psyche, twisting and sprouting roots of doubt. Was it real? Or was it something his mind had conjured in a desperate bid for meaning? The kind of question that haunts you long after the screen goes dark. It was then that Margot showed up, unannounced, knocking hard enough to jar the plaster. She was an enigma wrapped in worn leather and cigarette smoke, with eyes that held more secrets than comfort. James barely remembered how they met, maybe a chance encounter on the subway, or an after-hours bar in Brooklyn. But now she was here, leaning in close, voice low and urgent like she was sharing a secret the world didn't deserve to hear. "You don't want to go down this rabbit hole alone," she said, almost laughing, but it didn't reach her eyes. "There's things they don't want you to remember, stuff that messes with your head, and once you see it, you can't unsee it." But Margot's words felt like sandpaper against raw nerves, abrasive and too sharp to fully trust. She spoke in riddles, half-truths, and contradictions, sometimes, slipping details that didn't add up, like she was trying to protect James from the truth, while also pulling him closer to it. She handed him a small USB drive, cold and heavy in his palm, promising answers that only bred more questions. The files on it weren't like the alien recording. They were fragmentary, disjointed audio clips with glitches so thick they masked more than they revealed. Voices overlapped, familiar names distorted beyond recognition, memories rearranged like puzzle pieces from a box that wasn't meant to be solved. Listening to the clips was a slow torture, like hearing a friend's voice through a broken radio, familiar yet impossibly distant. Some of the recordings contradicted his own recollections. One moment he was speaking about the file with Margot. The next, the audio suggested he'd never heard of it, and between the static, an eerie background hum resonated, almost imperceptible but relentless. It was the kind of sound that burrows into your mind, making you question whether it's inside your head or out there somewhere, alive and watching. The deeper James waded into this mess, the more he noticed the fractures in his own reality. There were entire hours missing from his day, like someone or something had slipped in and erased chunks of time. His phone showed calls he didn't remember making, texts sent to unknown contacts. Photos appeared in his gallery that he swore he never took, blurry shapes, half-seen faces that seemed to leer just out of focus. At night, his dreams grew darker, bleeding into waking moments with unsettling familiarity. Shadows moved just beyond his vision, and faint voices, sometimes his own, sometimes others, whispered from empty rooms. Yet despite the growing paranoia, James was desperate for clarity, even if it meant confronting the truth behind what no one tells you, the real unsolved mystery that thrummed beneath everyday life. Was the alien recording a genuine message from beyond, or a symptom of something deeper, some mental fissure or cosmic trickery designed to fracture perception? And what role did Margot play in this? Was she a guide or a ghost, a savior or a puppeteer weaving a web of confusion? One evening, as rain hammered against the windows like an urgent drumbeat, James found himself sitting across from Margot in a dimly lit diner. Her face was softer than usual, shadows folding into something almost human. But her eyes held that same edge of unreadable intent. She leaned forward and spoke with a fragile honesty that chilled him. "You're not the first," she said. "People like us, people who glimpse what they shouldn't, they get swallowed by it. The memories, the voices, the erasures. Sometimes it's the mind-breaking. Sometimes something else. Something watching, waiting. And sometimes they never come back." Her words sank like stones in his gut, each syllable a ripple that unsettled the calm surface he was desperately trying to maintain. James realized then that whatever was happening wasn't just about him. It was bigger, woven to the fabric of his world, a hidden layer of reality folded beneath the one he'd known his whole life. And no matter how much he clawed for answers, what he really feared was losing himself entirely, becoming another ghost in a story no one remembered, a whisper swallowed by the dark. When James returned home that night, the apartment was cold. The familiar glow of his laptop beckoned from the desk, but on the screen was a message he never typed, blinking slowly in the empty void. "Do you remember who you are?" And in that moment, the line between truth and madness snapped clean, leaving nothing but the raw, aching silence of the unknown. James sat back in the flickering light of his laptop screen, a fragile, fleeting sense of relief washing over him, like a breath finally drawn after a long, suffocating silence. The latest file Margot had sent him wasn't just fragmented noise or broken memories anymore. It was a key, or so it seemed. Hidden deep within the distorted recordings was a pattern, a sequence of tones and words that, when pieced together, formed a message. Not from aliens this time, but from someone or something far closer to home. As James traced each note and syllable, a chilling narrative unfolded. An experiment, a cover-up, a memory erased but not destroyed. The pieces clicked with an eerie precision, revealing the shadowy figure behind his missing hours, his fractured memories, the creeping dread that had chased him for weeks. The truth was simple, or at least it felt like it could be. James discovered an encrypted journal belonging to a scientist named Henry Alden, a man erased from every public record, yet whose research eerily echoed James's own disjointed experiences. Alden had been working on a top-secret project aimed at probing human consciousness, pushing the boundaries between mind and reality. The files described sessions where subjects watched extreme psychological stimuli, horrifying images, simulated trauma, while being monitored by an unseen force that observed not just their reactions but the very fabric of their memories. The implications were terrifying but clear. James's alien recording, his fragmented audio clips, the vanishing hours, all of it was part of a psychological warfare experiment gone rogue, one designed to test human resilience and manipulate perception itself. For a moment, James allowed himself to believe. The puzzle had been solved. The Watchers were not extraterrestrial but human, government agents, scientists, something colder and more calculating. The paranoia, the fractured memories, even Margot's cryptic warnings made sense. She wasn't a phantom or a deceiver, but a whistleblower, a guide sent to help him escape a labyrinth of lies. The clicking behind his walls, the ghostly voices, just echoes of his mind trapped in a dangerous experiment. James felt a hollow victory as he prepared to expose the hidden truth, to prove that he wasn't crazy, that they lied to him and to everyone like him. But then the memory glitch hit. It came, unbidden, a sudden flash like a strobe light igniting the darkest corners of his mind. James saw a long-forgotten scene. Himself, a child no older than 6, standing in a cold hospital corridor. The walls were sterile, too bright, and somewhere close the low hum of machines mingled with whispered voices. He remembered a face, then not his own but someone else's, an older man, calm and distant, pressing a finger to his lips and mouthing words he couldn't hear. The man's eyes were empty, but there was something deeply personal in the way they looked at James, as if he were a puzzle piece the man desperately wanted to hide. The memory wasn't just a recollection, it was a mirror, reflecting something that had been buried beneath layers of trauma and time. The hospital, the watching eyes, the silent warnings, they weren't just symbols from the past, but an eerie echo of what was happening now. Like history folding in on itself, a cruel loop where James was both the observer and the observed, trapped in a nightmare written long before he ever discovered the alien recording. As this past seeped into his present, the atmosphere in the apartment thickened with a presence that felt almost sentient. It was neither alien nor human, but something darker and far older, a force that had watched from the beginning, patiently unraveling his sanity with invisible threads. It whispered through the static, lurked in the flicker of the screen, and crawled beneath his skin with a quiet menace that no explanation could touch. And then the detail that unraveled everything. Buried in the last file from Alden's journal was a note scrawled in trembling handwriting, almost as if it were a confession. It wasn't from Alden but from someone else, a name James recognized instantly but hadn't thought of in years. The man from the hospital memory, his voice echoing through the digital page. "It's not them you need to fear. It's what they awoke inside you. The screen flickered violently, the image distorting until James was staring not at the journal but at his own reflection, fractured and multiplied across the shards of the laptop screen. The room spun, the clicking behind the walls crescendoed into a deafening roar, and everything he thought he knew collapsed in on itself. In that moment, James realized he hadn't uncovered the mystery. He had been led deeper into it, like a moth spiraling closer to a flame that would consume him whole. The Watchers weren't just distant observers or cold scientists. They were part of something far more intimate, a shadow lurking inside his own mind, rewriting his past and controlling his future. As the screen finally went black, James understood the cruelest truth of all. The story wasn't about aliens or experiments, but about a hidden truth buried so deep inside himself that the only way out was to question every memory, every moment, every feeling he'd ever trusted. And in that questioning, he had to face the terrifying possibility that he might never find a way back, because the Watchers weren't outside at all. They had always been inside, and now so were you. It was time to re-watch everything. The moment James's screen went dark, a subtle shift rippled through the stillness of his apartment. But it wasn't just inside those four walls where the darkness deepened. Somewhere beyond the blinking city lights, tucked in the shadows of suburban homes and forgotten alleys, other voices stirred. Voices like whispers barely caught on the wind, messages sent through static and silence. Fragments of a conspiracy too vast and tangled for one mind alone to unravel. They had been watching all along, silent spectators cloaked in secrecy, connected through dreams and visions that bled between sleep and wakefulness, sharing symbols etched not in ink, but in the fragile synapses of memory itself. You might feel it now, a subtle flicker beneath your skin, a glimmer of recognition as these fragments begin to piece themselves together inside your own mind, and suddenly you realize you were right all along. For every whisper James caught, there was an echo elsewhere, screens flickering with static that resolved just long enough to reveal cryptic codes, digital runes that meant nothing to the untrained eye but spoke volumes to those who had learned to see between the lines. Street signs, abandoned billboards, and the graffiti-scrawled walls of forgotten cities seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, each symbol a node in a sprawling network of surveillance and control. And those who understood the language of these symbols knew they were part of something far larger, a covert web that had entangled more lives than anyone dared admit. You might have caught one yourself, the fleeting glimpse of a symbol carved into a tree, or the sudden, inexplicable urge to turn your head toward a shadow where no one else looks. These are not accidents. They are messages, invitations, warnings crafted in a language that transcends words and time. In the quiet hours when the world slumbers, some find themselves dragged unwillingly into shared dreams, nights woven with the same haunting tapestry of fractured images, a faceless figure watching from behind cracked glass, a hallway endlessly folding into itself, whispers of names never spoken aloud, but felt deep in the marrow of their bones. You might have experienced this, the sense that your dreams are no longer your own, but belong to a collective mind, tethered to something outside comprehension, an unseen force that observes not just bodies, but the very essence of identity. These dreams carry a terrible truth wrapped in silence, a truth that suggests memory itself can be manipulated, that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are vulnerable to corruption. And in that revelation, the fragile line between sanity and madness begins to blur, leaving you wondering if your own thoughts are really your own, or if you have been a player on a stage you never agreed to enter. Amid this growing shadow emerges a new perspective, one not entwined with the confusion and fear of those caught in the spiral, but positioned as a detached observer, a watcher of watchers, a voice claiming to be the only one telling the unvarnished truth. This third figure speaks not through direct confrontation, but through fragments. A hidden blog post surfaced from the depths of the dark web, a distorted video marked only by a timestamp from 20 years ago, footage the government never released, and yet now circulating quietly in encrypted corners of the internet. The video shows an experiment eerily similar to Alden's, but far more invasive, where subjects are monitored not just for psychological responses but for signs of their very essence slipping away, their identities folding like paper into something unrecognizable. This observer warns of a force that transcends human understanding, an entity that does not merely watch but controls, shaping the minds of those it touches, erasing who they once were and remaking them in shadows. The warnings are cloaked in urgency and despair, but they come with a chilling clarity. The watcher's influence is expanding, seeping through the cracks of reality itself, and those who resist risk being swallowed whole by a darkness that feeds on identity. In this labyrinth of blurred memories, shared visions, and hidden messages, the question that gnaws relentlessly at your mind is no longer what happened to James, but what is happening to you. Who are you if the memories you trust can be rewritten? What does it mean to be human when your thoughts are not your own, and the story of your life is just another script being edited behind the scenes? The viewers, once passive witnesses, are now unwitting participants, drawn deeper into a conspiracy where reality fractures and the safe boundaries of self dissolve into uncertainty. Every familiar detail, the faces of loved ones, the comfort of daily routines, becomes suspect, a potential lie masked by the veneer of normalcy. The watchers do not just observe, they infiltrate, infecting every layer of consciousness with doubt and dread, crafting an ever-tightening noose around free will itself. And yet, despite the encroaching darkness, the signals persist, subtle, insistent, impossible to ignore. Symbols flashing briefly on screens, strange echoes in your own dreams, cryptic messages hidden in plain sight on platforms you thought you trusted. They tell you that you are not alone, that the scattered fragments of truth can be pieced together, and that the story is far from over. You feel the weight of this knowledge pressing against your ribs like a silent pulse, and the whispered promise that understanding comes not from surrender, but from the relentless pursuit of the hidden truth. But the deeper you dig, the more the ground shifts beneath you, and the more you realize that the watchers are not just distant observers or faceless enemies. They are the shadow inside, the fracture within your mind, and the question you were never meant to ask. The screen flickers once more, and in the dim glow a single symbol emerges, one you recognize but cannot name. It lingers just long enough to imprint itself on your soul before the darkness swallows it again, leaving you breathless and haunted, suspended on the edge of revelation and oblivion. The watchers have always been here, watching you watch them. Twisted mirror reflecting back everything you thought you knew about reality, identity, and control. The story pulses around you, alive and waiting, daring you to look closer, to remember what they don't want you to remember, because now, 'tis not just James's story, it is yours and the watchers. They're listening. In the cold stillness of his apartment, James sat alone, the weight of every fragmented memory pressing down on him like a tidal wave threatening to break the fragile dam of his sanity. The flickering screen no longer held the answers he once sought. It only reflected back the chaos inside his mind, a chaos that had grown beyond explanation, beyond fear. And now the question wasn't what had happened, or even who was behind it. It was why. Why had he been chosen? Why this twisting of reality, this erasure and remaking of identity? And what did it reveal about what it truly means to be human? The truth began to unfurl, not like a clear map, but like a dark, shifting shadow. James understood that this mystery wasn't some external enemy attacking him from the outside. No, it was the raw, brutal vulnerability at the core of his own existence. The watchers, the shared dreams, the symbols, they were all manifestations of a deeper fear. The fear that the self is fragile, that our memories, our experiences, our very souls can be stolen or distorted, until what remains is a hollow echo of what once was. And in that realization, James felt the crushing weight of what it meant to be human, a creature who clings to identity as if it were a lifeline, even when that identity is a construct, fragile and malleable as smoke. He stared at the fractured reflection in the darkened window, his own face but not quite, and in that moment of unbearable clarity, The entire labyrinth of his ordeal twisted into one painful truth. The Watchers were not some distant force bent on destruction. They were mirrors, reflecting back the deepest parts of himself he never wanted to see. The relentless surveillance, the memory glitches, the shared nightmares, they were not just violations but warnings, invitations to confront the terrifying unknown inside. James's hands trembled as he reached for the last piece of evidence he had stumbled upon, a journal hidden in a digital archive, a confession left by someone long erased from his own memory. The words spilled out like a wound reopened, raw and aching. We are not prisoners of the Watchers. We are prisoners of ourselves, the fragile illusion we call self. To survive, to truly live, we must face the fracture within, embrace the chaos and let go of the idea that we are whole. The confession shattered something inside him, a barrier he didn't know existed. The fight wasn't against an enemy beyond, but against the part of himself that feared dissolution, that clung desperately to control and certainty. The Watchers had forced him to the edge, not to destroy but to awaken. And yet, in this revelation came the most agonizing choice: to surrender to the unraveling, risking total loss of self, but gaining freedom beyond understanding, or to resist, to hold tight to the illusions that gave his life meaning, even if it meant eternal captivity in a cage of his own making. Tears traced silent paths down James's face as he faced the abyss of his own identity. The mystery was no longer about what had been done to him. It was about what he would do now, when the world he thought he knew was gone, replaced by a truth so vast and fragile it could either save or destroy him. He breathed deeply, feeling the line between nightmare and awakening blur until they became one. In that moment of terrifying clarity, the story shifted, not to an ending but to a beginning, a piercing dawn where the only certainty was uncertainty, where the only path forward was through the unknown. And as the city lights flickered beyond, the glass casting long shadows into the room, James whispered, not just to himself, but to everyone who had ever felt lost in the dark. Maybe the real horror isn't what watches us, but what lives inside us, waiting to be faced. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the true freedom lies. The screen faded to black. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.